Welcome back to Killing Them Softly. I'm your host, Angela Huguenin. Over the next 3 episodes, we are going to take a deep dive into the goals of the abortion industry, and we are going to hear just how they achieve those goals through operations, through their employees, and through partnerships. We will answer questions like, if the abortion industry is so committed to the well-being of their patients, why are all of their STD testing, cancer screenings, and well woman care numbers plummeting? And why have STD numbers continued to rise over the last several years? And if abortions aren't their primary focus, then why have the abortion numbers continued to rise every year? We will hear from 4 former abortion workers who will all say that the abortion industry's goal is to increase access to abortion and to drive revenue for the organization, and how operational practices ensure that employees push only for greater access to abortion, despite their mission stating that they respect and honor diverse opinions and that they embrace new ideas. So what is the real agenda of the abortion industry, and what kind of world are they building? Well, let's ask the experts. My first guest tonight is she is a former regional vice president for Planned Parenthood. Welcome, and thank you for joining me tonight. Dr. During your time in the abortion industry, you desired to develop case management programs that would educate women about the resources and the help that they need to overcome barriers and to help them become successful parents. However, you quickly learned that the goal of the industry was to increase access to abortion. As someone in executive leadership, were proposals that might have reduced emphasis on abortion services met with openness?
I'm glad to be here. To answer your question, the short answer is no. The longer answer is I noticed that there was a lack of information provided to patients regarding treatment, a lack of and options that might include keeping a child and what that might look like long term. So I was interested in implementing programs that might help to educate potential parents on childcare, different childcare services, temporary assistance to needy families, some different options for maybe employment or housing. So basically case management services, so sort of like wraparound care. And I recognize that this is something that is not provided in counseling services pre-termination. And when I offered to set up a program, because that's what I did in my not provided career, so I offered to set up this program, which could in itself be lucrative. Insurance pays for case management services, so I thought that it would kind of fit nicely with the counseling that's supposed to occur pre-termination. And when I offered to do this, there was no interest across the board in setting this up with the I think the emphasis is really just on increasing numbers, increasing abortions. It's not really on anything else. So yeah.
Yeah, so they just weren't receptive at all to you coming in and saying, hey, we can really help these women be successful. We can set them up for success in their parenting. So can you tell us a little bit more about how they received that information and what was their response to you?
Sure. I presented it to the chief suite, and the response was, "Oh, that's interesting," and then immediately it got sort of talked off the table. I revisited it, sure, at least weekly, and weekly it was met with, "Wow, that's a really interesting idea," and it never made its way to any agendas unless I brought it up. What was always on the agenda was increasing access to care, which in other words is a way of saying in the industry increasing abortion.
So how did they do that? How did they access or increase the access to abortion? What was the operation that helped you to push that out into the community, or what was the method that they used to push that out into the community?
Increasing access to care, means increasing the number of abortions, and it's sort of like a tiered kind of an approach. Um, One way is to look at what is preventing women from seeking abortion or getting. So, is it timing? So is access to care being hindered by number of weeks allowed? Like depending on the state. In which case, there are specific that were developed to help to navigate patients to different states with more lax you know, what's the word? Kind of more lax standards in terms of how many weeks are allowed, gestational weeks are allowed before termination can take place. Um, Another way of increasing access, like marketing and doing outreach, doing different sort of outreach projects that were geared towards marketing to pull people in for services. Other ways of increasing access to care, securing what are sort of like scholarships for an individual to receive an abortion. So there are different eh, kind of donors or people who would fund abortions for women. They would have these specific. It was really like sort of like a scholar outreach. A woman qualified for funds, should be certain age, maybe single, maybe not have enough money or whatever to do it on her own, then she would qualify for this sort of chips. And so they would want to make sure that they used all of the funding that had been appropriated for these. And so they would sort of push uh, for this funding to be used too. So a lot of different ways that access to care had been a focus. Specific.
Yeah. And in another episode, we are going to deep dive a little bit more into just their ways of targeting the community in which they serve, and we're gonna talk a little bit more about that in upcoming episodes. But there are other things involved inside the operation of Planned Parenthood that just really aren't ethical practices. There are things that they do that have proven to be an issue. More and more, we see healthcare organizations implementing DEI coaching and training. What is your perspective on these efforts, and how do they influence workplace dynamics?
It's a really good question, and one I am very familiar with. So I can't speak about any specific affiliate, but I can say sort of in general. I think that the goal of abortion providers is sort of this kind of like really woke, kind of like an agenda, because that sort of fits in political advocacy of the work that's being done around abortion. So one of those things is the DEI initiative. And the issue that I think comes up with, and this is one I with any um, industry, or this can be applied to sort of any industry, but when you try to kind of push an agenda that's not um, authentic, you end up with a potentially really toxic work environment wherein things like racism abound because uh, there's not like a genuine advocacy focus or drive to learn about um, how backgrounds kind of influence the work environment or the work culture. It's more about we're woke, and so these are the things that we believe in. These are the policies that we sort of stand by. To implement those kind of arbitrarily, it can create a really toxic environment wherein you're saying like, um, any person who's white has to be an apologist, and any person who's not has to be a victim. And it sets the stage for a lot of kind of unhealthy interpersonal dynamics that just aren't genuine. That's not just about, we work together and we get along with each other and we try to be professional and respectful. And And so and I think we're seeing that a lot too. It's not just this industry, but I think sort of across the board that this is becoming kind of, people are sort of waking up to, you can't force people to be sort of, to be, woke. Especially most people don't even understand what that means, and don't agree with it, or don't sort of understand the utility of it. And so it can become kind of a toxic environment to work in. It sets.
So, if this is a toxic environment for the employees, how do you feel that that really translates then to the care that they're giving to the patients coming in? And is that same toxic environment, is it, um, put on the patients that come in? Are they treated in the same manner that the employees are treated?
So that's an interesting question. So I can speak sort of in a broad sense. So I'm a psychologist, and uh, in my history, I've really focused on um, culture in terms of like its impact on identity and myriad of other things, interpersonal functioning and things like that. Um, and when when any company, I think, tries to sort of so it's just the most ridiculous thing. I'm trying to even think of how to put it into words. When any sort of kind of like company tries to pre-force out, this is how you act to people of color, that's racist, right? Like, we're making assumptions. We're saying like, you are like this, so look, and I am like this because of the way I look. And so you literally just created the construct that you were trying to prevent. So it's more, it's like the lazy way of understanding how culture impacts workplace in terms of like its impact on individuals, and how we sort of all work together as a collective. That takes a lot of work. That's not easy. You can't put a stamp on that and say like, we're woke things that are, we think that like, if you're a person of color, you are a victim, and if you're not, then you're a perpetrator. Because when you have that mentality, right, like, think about the impact that has then on your patients. We're saying like, well, you come to me and let's say, in any sort of color, well, you come to me for an abortion, I'm going to make assumptions now about you based on the way you look, and I'm going to then provide care, or sort of funnel you through a process based on what I think your needs are, and I'm assuming that you're a victim, and I'm assuming that your needs are different than a person who's not of color. And that, again, that is literally the definition of racism. That is by definition racism. The point of care, again, I'm a provider, I'm a of, is to understand your biases and to like check your own stereotypes, and to say, you're a person, it doesn't matter what you look like, you're a person. I need to learn about your experiences, I need to learn about who you are, I need to not make assumptions based on that, like, about you. um, you know, in the broader media or in culture, or the things that I've been taught in movies, or whatever, or heard on different people say. And the issue is, they don't do that. They're not doing that. So yeah, I'm sure there's an incredible impact on the patients as well.
Yeah. If I'm feeling that racism is maybe projected onto me, it is going to affect how I treat my patients when they come in as well. Um, from your broader experience, there was also some challenges in ensuring that there were high standards of care, and high standards in staffing and training in the abortion industry. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience with that?
Yeah, so something I had not thought about prior to working in the industry was that, in order so the hiring process is a little bit different than a place that is not at all politically aligned, that's really neutral. Um, the hiring process, that you have to sort of go through a process of like political kind of uh, a process of sort of like kind of weeding out individuals who might not be a good fit politically and who might not be a good fit in terms of what they're comfortable with. So out of the gate, some of the questions you might encounter is: Are you comfortable with abortion? Are you comfortable with the abortion industry, or whatever particular company, kind of what they stand for, or what their political beliefs or their goals or their opinions are. And I think because of that, you're with fewer candidates because you're out of the gate sort of getting rid of a big swath of individuals who would not be comfortable with those things. And so now you have a smaller pool to pick from, and sometimes you get really lucky and sometimes you get really unlucky. So I noticed it was kind of hit or miss. There's sometimes in that I think, how did this person get to this high ranking position or get promoted over everybody else, when it doesn't seem like they necessarily have the skills, that's just sort of background. And again, sometimes you get really lucky, but sometimes you don't. So I found that was sort of an unusual thing, and a lot of the other places, companies, healthcare settings I've worked in, there seemed to be less discrepancy.
Yeah, I agree. And we've heard from several former workers, especially those who were in higher positions, talk about these discrepancies as well. Myra, I'd like to turn to you. You were a Planned Parenthood employee for 17 years in Arizona. You actually were hired at Planned Parenthood as a medical lab technician. You quickly rose through the ranks, became a director. And at some point during your employment, Planned Parenthood decided that you would begin training employees to do sonograms, although you were never a sonographer. So that just tells us right there about some of those discrepancies, right? You also witnessed the hiring of those who didn't even have high school diplomas, hiring nurses who were not yet licensed, maybe who were still in school, and including one who was writing prescriptions. This is a direct violation of the law, and it's happening right there in your clinic or in one of your clinics. Can you tell us just about the medical director who was at risk for losing her license because of this issue?
Yeah. Well, just to clarify, the medical lab technician program was from Mexico, not even from this country, right? So it wasn't that I went to school for that here in the United States. This is from Mexico. And all I had from here was a high school diploma. And that my diploma from Mexico validate some of the studies to make it seem like a medical assistant. Yeah, I did a lot of the hiring and training, right? And I was trained for some crazy reason, which I never understood. They were allowed to do their own training to employees. A lot of our nurses in recovery room and the ones helping push medications in the room were barely nurses that were finishing school, not yet having their full licensing. But because they were working under another nurse, they were allowed to be considered like they were practicing. We had a lot of med students coming in and doing the abortions, and he wouldn't even charge that a med student was doing the abortion, right? Those are all the things I actually name on my lawsuit against Planned Parenthood because I saw them wrong, right? And those are things that I realized at the abortion facility. But during the 60 years working on the non-abortion side, I hired a lot of people that barely had a high school diploma, didn't have an MA certification. Most OBGYNs only hire MAs for the back, right? But because we did our own training, and that I did for many years, which was train staff how to do blood draw, how to do quick labs, how to do pregnancy tests, how to do hematocrit, how to do RH detection, right? The type of blood, all that stuff. I trained many staff to do that. And I was trained, I was a medical lab technician, so I knew a lot of that from school, but I was trained to do that, and I trained them to do that. And yeah, we will constantly hire nurse practitioners that were barely finishing their nurse practicing. And before they even had license, I mean, they graduated from the program, and they were just awaiting for that little final detail, which to me is not little, right? It's your licensing. And they were already prescribing under the medical director or whatnot. I don't think he cared. It was the same director I accused of all these wrongdoings himself, the falsifying patient charge to himself. I don't think he cared. He knew it was happening and he didn't care. He knew exactly the nurses that were working without a license, that had just been hired. And for some reason, they thought it was okay. I just think Planned Parenthood thinks they can get away with it. And because they have, honestly, they have gotten away with it.
Yeah, they have gotten away with it. We heard Dr. also speak in regards to.
And you saw me nodding my head like this, like a bobblehead. Yep, that happened. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Sure.
Yeah.
She spoke a little bit about how she also encouraged them to look at other options for their patients, such as the case management that she was trying to put out there. You had told me or talked to me earlier about a doctor who was available and willing to do vasectomies. And he had offered his services pro bono. And tell us about how your superiors took to that offer.
Yeah, so we ran the vasectomy program when I was an assistant manager back in I believe it was 2007, right? And this urologist was doing them for free. It was pro bono once a month. It will be get me 30 men. I'll get them done. And we had 3 staff members, 1 nurse and him, right, on a Saturday. And we even applied for the grants from the state of Arizona, that helps pay for some of the cost of sterilization under Title 10, correct? And so they cut the program, right? And I thought it was urologists, right? I'm like, why did you stop? It's so much needed, right? This is, to me, I mean, part of my story is that I was very dedicated to prevention. To me, that's the key for unwanted pregnancies, prevention. So therefore, I gave it my best, right? And when I approach him and I say, hey, why are you doing this? Where, how much would it take for you to come back? And he's like, no, I told them I wouldn't charge. They told me no more. And I say, why not? And he's like, I don't know. So then I went to the supervisors, right? And trying to implement as soon as I became a director, now I have the power, I thought, right? I get to decide that I can implement programs and whatnot on my center. And I suggested bringing him back. I had talked to him and he had agreed. And they said no, there's little no money there and too much liability, right? So everything that was done, if a patient came back positive, abnormal on their Pap smear, that's it. We will expire that patient from that practice. She will not come back because even if she attempted to schedule another appointment, it will be no, you should go back to your OBGYN that took care of that issue previously, right? Because what I got from it is the less liability, the better. And obviously that meant everything else where they cannot get away with murder, it's more liability.
And we're talking about direct women's health care. You had talked about women who, maybe who had a diagnosis with ovarian cancer or cervical cancer. They wouldn't see them. They wanted nothing to do with them.
Right.
You talked about, other situations where they didn't want to touch that. Women's health care.
Yeah, we had, most of the, back then, I said back then because unfortunately now with all the climate and the political agenda and all the enshrining abortion on constitutions, a nurse practitioner can do anything. But back then, OBGYNs were required to do abortions in Arizona. So to you, it's most OBGYNs are trained to do colposcopies, which is the actual cancer-saving treatment, cryosurgery, right, for anyone. But we had the equipment, Angie. We had the equipment. We had all the equipment to do a colposcopy, and we had the doctor. So to me, it's common sense, right? I mean, I have the equipment. It's good. I had just got it retested reset, and it was all good to go. And I suggested re-implementing colposcopies in our center, and I had to fight for it. I had to fight really, really hard because the OBGYN's like, I'm not here to do that. It's too much work. It's too much paperwork. Obviously, because you have to follow up with a patient. This time, you really have to follow up. You have to make sure she's fine after that. So it wasn't something. It's like the less liability, the better. The less paperwork, the better. The less I can do to actually help women, the better.
And it drains resources, right?
Exactly.
We need to save resources so that we can increase the access to abortion.
Exactly.
You also ran several Title X clinics within your area. Walk us through how Planned Parenthood was able to bill an abortion access fund and the patient for the same exact abortion procedure.
And Title X.
Service, yes, and Title X. I know that these preventative services were billed at inflated prices, and it's all for the same visit, the same patient. Walk us through how that happens.
I mean, Angie, if you had a guest in your house double dipping their chip 3 times on your queso, you will not invite them again, wouldn't you? But here we are giving them our tax money every time and every time and every time. So a patient comes in, right? And she has, in the state of Arizona, we call it Access. Access is the Medicare, Medi-Cal program of Arizona, right? The government-funded insurance for low-income people. And let's say they don't cover abortion, right? So we'll be like, well, okay, I don't have $625. Okay, we do have some funding available if you qualify. And since you are on Access, you do qualify, right? So they can pay about 45% to 50% of the cost. That leaves you with about $310. Okay, well, you can also call NARAL, which I know they changed their name now, and they have some funding available too, right? And then after that, the patient comes in and says, like, well, you're responsible for the 310 if you were not able to get anything else, right? She pays the 310. Then they send her to collect for the other 310 from the Abortion Access Fund. And then it's like, since she already told us she had access and the paperwork she was filling in, she had to fill in insurance, right? Then at that moment, we go ahead and submit the lab work, right? As a kind of like a pregnancy consultation, you call it whatever, which is the pregnancy test, the RH factor, the hematocrit, any lab work necessary, plus the consultation fee, because they get to do that, right? So they create 2 types of visit, one that they can bill under her insurance, and if she took any birth control, right? And if for some reason she comes back on a Title X center, right? And whatever it is, which is the follow-up of her abortion, if one for a miracle came back for a follow-up, right? Then on that follow-up, it can be put under title because they just put it as a birth control consultation with a pelvic exam, right? And then they bill all over again, all those. They bill Title X for it. They bill their access again, which is their Medicare, right? And they already had their access funds. So that's what I'm saying. Like, it's triple dipping, right? None of us will invite anyone to do that in our house, but here we are giving our money over and over and over again.
Yeah, and all the while, the patient feels that
We're
guys
the best. We're nice.
Yeah, you've taken care of her situation, and you guys are profiting, or Planned Parenthood is profiting off of this woman.
Right, because those patients don't ever hear that their insurance was billed for those labs, because they don't get a copay from them. They don't get access, usually doesn't say anyone like a summary of services they have paid for them, right? Because first of all, they don't want to know how much is their contract with hospitals or clinics. So most access patients don't get a copy of those services done under their insurance.
Wow. We can see how all of this is working together. And Dr. Is there anything that you would like to add to that?
Yeah, it's just interesting. I mean, I'm also shaking my head. It's so much of this. And I think, the reason why speaking out for me is so important is because this is just another way that women are exploited. And it's like so criminal that this particular way is sort of under the guise of being supportive and helpful to women. And I think you, Angela, just sort of hit the nail on the head. Like, um, this industry looks like it is in support of women at sort of face value. But as we're kind of delving in here, what I'm hearing over and over is it's just another way that women are exploited, not given the right options, not given appropriate options, or not able to actually make a decision without the options. If they don't know that there are programs that are in existence that could help them to make a different choice, or if looked at as just sort of like a dollar sign. How much money can we get from each service that we provide this person, rather than what's really in the best interest of this person. Like what really would actual care be like for this person, anyway.
Yeah, and I think about in any normal business, we look at ways that we can be cost effective at serving our clients, or we're looking at ways to improve our service. But that's the opposite of what Planned Parenthood is doing, right? They're looking for ways that they can exploit, profit off of, and if the service isn't good, so what? They're still going to come back time and time again because they believe that we are giving them what they need. Caroline,
Well,
go ahead.
I was just going to say absolutely, and just to sort of piggyback off that, I own a business, I own a practice where I see patients, and in my practice, I'm always thinking about what's the best for my patient, what's going to help them to get better, what's going to help to really be able to thrive. What services can we do? How can we provide services in a different way? How can we measure outcomes? I'm always thinking about first, then what part of that is billable so we can keep the doors open. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I'm not going to get people unless they believe that I can help them. And so this is an industry where they do believe that they're being helped, but they're not really. So
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what we hear from most of our workers. Went into this business thinking that I was helping women. And once you're in there and you really see what's going on, you realize that you're not truly helping them. Caroline, I just want to turn to you for a moment. You worked as a clinician for Planned Parenthood, and you shared that during your time with them, you were involved in training for the Nexplanon insertion procedure. Going again, talking about the standard in which we're hiring people, the standard in which we're training people. Can you tell us a little bit just about your experience surrounding that training and that procedure?
I want to piggyback on what Myra and Dr. Sullivan had to say as far as trying to implement programs that would help women. While I was pregnant with my daughter, our Planned Parenthood was providing prenatal health services through a local midwife group. And I was 6 months pregnant when they got rid of the prenatal group, and I couldn't understand why they would do such a thing. And management wanted to no longer provide prenatal. They didn't want to have clients who had hysterectomies or tubal ligations, really serving those clients. And they no longer wanted to support the Breast and Cervical Cancer Project, which in Ohio paid for the cost of Pap screenings, the mammograms. Of course, we provided orders. Planned Parenthood doesn't do mammograms, in case you didn't get that memo. And we could also do colposcopies. I was a colposcopist as well. And so we were able to provide all those services, but all of a sudden, they didn't want to provide service to these individuals because they weren't at risk for pregnancy. And so I didn't quite figure it out until later. So I'll tell you my story and the bits about Nexplanon, and it kind of comes full circle with that, stopping that program and my light bulb moment, which took a decade. So at the time that I was doing the Nexplanon training, our local Planned Parenthood had merged with other Planned Parenthoods in the state. And so I went down to one of our sister affiliates and I had the training in the morning. And then that afternoon, I would be placing them in women and would be, precepted by another provider. And so I did the morning training, found out that I would be going to one of the abortion clinics to do the placements in the women after their abortions or after they were coming in for a follow-up of some sort. And so when I got there, that's when you brought up staff doing things they shouldn't have. I'm sorry, we have something very motorized that just went by. But as far as staff doing things they shouldn't have, I met the abortionist. She was going to be my preceptor. And then I saw the staff really uncomfortable, visually uncomfortable, saying things. The abortionist had a resident with her that day, and she was allowing the resident to do more than he should have. And so the staff was very bothered by this. When I was able to pause with her between, clients, she found out that I was there with her to do the Nexplanon training, to which she said to me, "Oh, I've never even done one of those. I guess I better read up on the package insert real quick." And so between seeing the medical resident, seeing and hearing the staff concerned about the medical resident doing things he shouldn't be doing, finding out that she wasn't trained in Nexplanon, and then she was to precept me doing them, I nicely excused myself from that, and I did not do any of the Nexplanon procedures that day. And so it was when I was in the car with my manager that I learned that the goal of Planned Parenthood was really to increase abortion quotas. And it was then that I had that light bulb moment, like, that's why we didn't want to provide, not we, I shouldn't put myself in with them. That's why they didn't want to provide prenatal care to women with hysterectomies and tubules, women who are getting the breast and cervical cancer funding because those are postmenopausal women. They wanted women who are at risk for pregnancy because that increases their bottom line with the abortion quotas.
Yeah, absolutely. And we are going to talk more about, how they do promote the risky behavior later on, and how this risky behavior then drives them back to Planned Parenthood time and time again. We talked earlier a little bit with Myra too about the Title X funding, and just in the ways that Planned Parenthood can use that to their benefit, and being able to double and even triple bill different funds and the patient as well. But the federal government has a lot of different programs. One of those is called the 340B program. And this program allows hospitals and clinics to buy medications at steep discounts, right? This is to help aid those who might be underinsured or uninsured, or maybe they're just low income patients. And yet you guys could use this program, or I'm sorry, again, I don't even want to be, you guys are former abortion workers. It is no longer you, but Planned Parenthood could take and order all of these medications at steep discounts. And then you guys are trained to bill these medications then back in at Title X at inflated prices, being able to, again, profit off of not just the patient, but also profiting off of programs within the federal government. Can you tell us about your experience with this 340B program and how it was used to boost the bottom line rather than really helping patients?
So there was a time when, and this was when we had merged with the other clinics, that the pricing of pills had gone up to $50 a pack. So if a client was assessed at 100%, they would be billed, $50 a pack. Whereas Planned Parenthood was getting this 340B pricing. So at most, a pack of pills would be $12. Now that's steep. We had pills that would cost $3, $6, $9 a pack. And so they were charging $50 a pack to eat up that Title X money faster.
Yeah. So just continuing to profit off of these patients and off of the federal government. Monica, I just want to to ask you a question as well. We're going to be sharing more about your background in the next episode, and how you worked with an organization that helped to promote safe sex to gay individuals. But your organization partnered with Planned Parenthood in teaching sex education. But from your experience with the grooming efforts of the abortion industry, I would just like for you to weigh in a little bit on Planned Parenthood's efforts and how they're focused on reducing or how they are not focused on reducing unplanned pregnancies, not teen pregnancies, and even reducing the number of STDs. They really are not focused on reducing those numbers. It's just about generating revenue. Can you talk to us a little bit about your experience with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was trained by Planned Parenthood on how to share the prevention message or comprehensive sex education with children. And it was never really about talking about preventing pregnancy. The majority, what I mean is that the majority of the teaching and education was how to have sex and how to reduce your risk of getting disease. And yes, about talking about using birth control. But the majority of the time, we're really talking about various sexual activities, describing those activities using gender neutral language so that we're also pushing an LGBTQ ideology on the kids. And it's really about reducing a child's inhibitions towards becoming sexually active in childhood, and reducing their inhibitions to experimenting with various sexual activities, how to use condoms, using lubrication, really sexualizing it, eroticizing the use of condoms and flavored lubrication, so that these children are actively seeking out sex in their communities, so with each other. So it was always presented in a way that was very fun, erotic. And what parents really need to know is that this sex education doesn't just teach them like out of a book. It really reaches out. It really reaches them at their various learning abilities, meaning they are speaking by using role playing. So they're actually practicing the speech of how to negotiate using condoms. They're negotiating how to talk to one another about STDs, and if they need to get tested, like how do you tell your partner you have an STD? Again, using the word partner. And so it was really about grooming these children to be sexually active in childhood and how to seek out Planned Parenthood for the services. And so it was never about if you get a disease or if you get pregnant. It's when you get a disease and when you get pregnant. And so once this education has essentially taught children to objectify themselves through sex, then they practice that with one another in the community. Even if it's emotionally hurtful to them, they continue to do that. And then once they're in a position where they are nervous about a disease or pregnancy, they now have this relationship with the educators at Planned Parenthood to go over there and get their testing and their treatment. And Title X pays for all of that. This federal money pays for that without parental consent or knowledge. And so literally, Title X language says that it will serve women of childbearing age. That means a girl as young as 9, someone who is able to get pregnant. And so if a girl is menstruating at around 9 years old, then Planned Parenthood and others like them justify teaching girls as young as 9 how to have sex, how to use condoms, how to use lubrication, how to negotiate what they're willing to do. And all of it is normalized in the education. So essentially what sex education is grooming children for childhood sex. It then also teaches them how to, quote unquote, navigate the healthcare system. And these are terms that parents should really understand what they mean, because this is the language that's being taught to the child. And this is the government language, the funding language that they're using. So when you see that a school or education is teaching a child how to navigate the healthcare system, what they're teaching them is that they can get these services from a Title X clinic, without parental knowledge, without parental consent. It'll be paid for by the government. And so these kids are going in there for their testing and their treatment of STDs. They're being counseled by the staff of Planned Parenthood to really trust them and to confide in them instead of their parents, because parents naturally are going to be upset that their child is involved in high risk activity, or if they have a disease, or if they've become pregnant. So they start to replace the parent with the clinicians, with the counseling staff at a Planned Parenthood, with the educators at the Planned Parenthood. And then, of course, once this ideology has been taught to the children and the children are actually practicing this, they're objectifying themselves, they're objectifying each other. It's a natural next step to then objectify the preborn child. So they go in for the abortion, because abortion isn't taught. They're not teaching embryology. They're not teaching about babies. They're not teaching about marriage. They're not teaching about love or relationships. They're teaching about sex, and that inevitably you'll get a disease. So come in for treatment, testing and treatment. And then eventually you're going to get pregnant and no problem, just come to the clinic and have the abortion. You know, one time my husband, now of course that I've left all of that, he said, how is it that you didn't realize abortion was killing a baby? Because I was groomed in that environment as well. So I didn't put it together until much later in life. And I realized it's because of the way these kids are being taught. And so it's really a cycle. It's become sexually active, use condoms, use lubrication, get tested, get treated, have the abortion, and start all over again. It's not about critical thinking skills. It's not about evaluating your behavior or your relationships. It's about simply following the next step. And so for many of these people, young people, is that they're not thinking about what that child is like, or if it's even a child. They're just doing the next thing that these trusted adults have taught them to do. And it's all funded by our government. It's all funded by Title X, HIV prevention and STD prevention.
Yeah, there's so much to unpack, and we are going to unpack much more of that in our next episode. I just want to ask you guys one last question for this episode, and it's really for any of you who would like to answer. But right now, we do see a push in the pro-life movement to really get people to start fighting for the defunding of Planned Parenthood. What would you say to parents? What would you say to just the normal American citizen, what they should do in this situation, and how important it is to truly see Planned Parenthood defunded? Go ahead, Myra.
Well, that if any other organization, any other business was double dipping, triple dipping, and making this amount of money where they get private donors, they get grants, they get all this money coming into them, and on top of it, charging patients and asking for donations on a daily basis to patients, we will all be quick to cut them down. You know, that this is not the place where you want your children to go, and trust us, we work there, right? You want them to go to a place where they will be safe, where you will have access to be with your child, if that's your decision to raise him that way, you know, and not a place that tells your children, don't talk to your parents about this. You can hide your visit. You can come see me. I won't call your parents, right? You don't want them there. So let's put our money to better use and fund real care.
Amen. Anyone else?
Well, I think people need to understand that what Planned Parenthood is doing, and what I witnessed as an educator and working alongside them for over 10 years, is that they promote human trafficking. Now, they will excuse it and actually say that these children are consenting to sex with adults. They will say that the prostitutes, who maybe are adults, are also consenting, and that this is legitimate work. But really behind the scenes, what you're seeing is that they have a very distorted view of sexuality and a very distorted view of our children. And they are promoting and enabling the trafficker. And so our government money, your taxpayer money at Planned Parenthood, is funding human trafficking. And it is funding the very trafficker. and it is harming. Harming is not even the right word, destroying the lives of children through rape, through trafficking. And Planned Parenthood loves to talk about consent, but they don't talk about the trafficking and how the trafficker is forcing these girls to consent through intimidation, through brainwashing, and it is happening. They're proud that they're serving the trafficking community. They believe they're doing something good. I'm telling you that they have a very distorted view of humanity, of sexuality, and of our children. And that is actually the reason I left my job, was I was teaching about human trafficking to Planned Parenthood, and they refused to view our young minor children as victims of traffickers. And they literally told me, they're consenting, Monica. It's what they want. And so through their own admission, they have a distorted view. They are a dangerous organization. Not only should they be defunded, they should be investigated.
Yeah, and all in the name of confidentiality. Dr. What would you like to add?
I agree with what everybody is saying, and I think, companies, I think, that are the most insidious are those that appear to be doing good on the surface and providing care, being woke and being, having empathy for all people and for, being really forward in terms of their approach or their sort of their mentality on sex and body positivity, but all of that is sort of all of that's kind of like a ruse for them to be able to sell a product, and the product is abortion, and the product that they're selling is birth control and treatment for STIs. And how do you sell a product that is dependent on sex without celebrating sex, right? And so they celebrate sex. It doesn't matter. Everybody's saying it doesn't matter what it looks like, if it's consensual or not. It doesn't matter if it's exploitative. It doesn't matter if it's harmful. That's how product is first. They're sort of reliant on this, and it sort of celebrates a culture of junk values that are promoting unhealthy behaviors. And I think we said earlier, right? There's no talk about relationships. There's no talk about healthy relationships. There's no talk about boundaries. There's no talk about what being consensual looks like, and what being open and having a voice looks like. There's really no conversation about that at all. I would say this is one of the most toxic companies because it sells junk values in order to exploit and take advantage of the people that it pretends to be taking care of. So.
And what we're seeing is they do it by dehumanizing. They dehumanize the patient. They dehumanize the baby. They dehumanize the workers and the community that they serve. It's all about dehumanization. And we are going to talk more about that. Well, ladies, thank you for tonight. And we look forward to seeing you again in episode 2. All of the issues that we have discussed tonight point to the fact that care is not the most important thing for the abortion industry. So what is the goal? It's money. And it's money that they make off of women. I want to take the time to thank each of these women for joining us tonight to expose the agenda of the abortion industry and to courageously use their voice to impact those who will hear the truth. Don't forget to join us for episode 2, where we are going to discuss the ways that Planned Parenthood grooms the community around them to participate in high-risk activity, which just drives these young men and women into the arms of Planned Parenthood. At And Then There Were None, we have helped more than 725 abortion workers find freedom from the abortion industry. Through the outreach of ATTWN, clinic workers all over the nation are waking up to realize that they are not helping women and then they reach out to us to assist them in exiting the abortion industry safely. For them, ATTWN offers a way out and a path to finding peace, joy, and freedom. But we still have so much work to do. There are still more than 3,000 workers who are caught in the enemy's grasp. But with your support, we can continue to reach out to them with the hope of Christ and offer them the resources that they need to walk away and point them to Christ for forgiveness and healing. If you would like to support the work of And Then There Were None, you can click the donation link at the bottom of this webcast, or you can visit our website at abortionworker.com. And you can also text the word quitter to 50155. And together we will work to end abortion from the inside out, one by one, until there are none.